Here, you'll find all the essential vocabulary to speak about this topic at an advanced level with confidence and fluency.
Welcome, everyone. Today, we're going deep on China's housing crisis.
Ooh, that's a big one.
It is, right. We've got this video essay called China's Housing Crisis, a controlled demolition, and some excerpts from economic and financial language.
Sounds like a good mix.
Yeah, and what we're trying to figure out is, well, you know how China built enough housing in like a few years to house everyone in the U.S.?
Right. Unbelievable, really.
But at the same time, their prices are through the roof and a ton of apartments are just empty.
Mm-hmm.
How does that even work?
Yeah, it's a real head scratcher. It kind of shows how, economic growth and social changes and, government decisions can all get tangled up.
Totally. So let's rewind back to the 1980s in China. The video, it paints this picture of a country about to go through this huge economic shift, but they had this major housing problem.
Shortage, you mean?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, imagine living in a space smaller than an American kitchen.
Yeah.
Seriously. That was the reality for a lot of people.
Yeah, the video has these really powerful visuals that show just how cramped it was. You see these tiny apartments, no basic stuff, and you're like, wow, this was everyday life for millions before the economy really took off.
Wild. Okay, so then in 1988, things change. There's this constitutional amendment that allows people to transfer land use rights. Might sound small, but it basically kicked off this real estate frenzy.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It meant that local governments could sell those land rights to developers. So suddenly there was this huge incentive to build, build, build. Housing went from a basic need to this big business opportunity almost overnight.
And that's where companies like Evergrande come in, right?
Bingo. They started with this one project, redeveloping an old pesticide plant in Guangzhou. And get this, they sold every single apartment in just 2 hours.
No way.
2 hours. It shows you just how fast things were moving. Evergrande's story is like a mini version of the whole Chinese real estate boom. They went from that one little project to a global player in no time.
But as we know, growing that fast comes with problems.
Oh, yeah, especially affordability.
Right. Housing prices in those big cities, Beijing, Shenzhen, they went crazy, even more expensive than places like London or Paris.
And the thing is, China has this big income gap. So, sure, there were more apartments, but most people couldn't even dream of buying one.
Like that statistic, right? You'd need 41 years of an average salary to buy an apartment in Shenzhen. That's insane. In New York, it's something like 13 years.
It's a huge difference. Makes you realize how disconnected housing became from, its whole point, giving people a place to live.
Yeah, it became more about making money than about having a home. And that's how you get that crazy stat, like almost 25% of all housing in China is empty. Empty. Millions of apartments all ready to go, but nobody's living in them.
Classic housing bubble, right? Prices go up not because the place is worth more, but because people think they'll keep going up forever.
A gamble based on that.
Exactly. A dangerous one, too. And like all bubbles, eventually it has to pop.
So what did the government do?
Well, they saw this happening, right? So in 2020, they tried to step in with this new policy, the 3 red lines.
Oh, yeah, I remember hearing about that. It was all about, controlling how much debt developers could take on.
Right, basically trying to cool down the market. Remember all those stories about developers getting huge loans to keep building more and more? This was the government saying, whoa, hold on a sec.
Makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But didn't some people think it was too little too late?
Yeah, there were definitely folks who thought that. Maybe it was just delaying the inevitable, not really fixing the underlying issues.
Interesting. So how did Evergrande, this company that was growing like crazy, react to these new rules?
Well, the 3 red lines hit them pretty hard. They couldn't borrow money as easily anymore, and that caused a cash crunch, especially with all their unfinished projects. Just imagine you've sold tons of apartments you haven't even built yet, and suddenly you can't get the money to finish them.
Oof. That's a recipe for disaster, right?
Big time. And then, to make things even worse, the pandemic hits.
Oh man, talk about bad timing.
Right. China's lockdowns really hurt the economy, making things even tougher for developers.
So it's like everything that could go wrong did go wrong.
Yeah, you could say that. The pandemic was like a catalyst, speeding up the whole crisis. It wasn't just the economy either. People started leaving the cities, going back to rural areas, partly because they just couldn't afford to live in the cities anymore.
Yeah.
It all came together like this perfect storm that pushed the housing market to the edge.
So Evergrande is in this, like, impossible situation. What did they do?
Well, they went into full panic mode. They tried getting into all sorts of other businesses, electric vehicles, senior care, anything to make some quick cash. They even tried selling their soccer team, Guangzhou FC, but no one wanted a team losing millions.
Sounds like they're just trying to stay afloat any way they could.
Yeah, it was pretty chaotic. They were scrambling, trying to avoid what seemed inevitable.
And as we'll see, even those desperate moves weren't enough to save them.
Yeah, it really does feel like watching a slow motion train wreck, you know? And then, December 2021, bam, they miss these bond payments. The video makes it this big dramatic thing, like all this eerie silence after the deadline passes. And then finally, Fitch Ratings is like, okay, it's official, Evergrande has defaulted.
Huge moment. For a company that basically survives on borrowed money, missing those payments, it's like game over. No one's going to want to lend to them anymore, or if they do, the interest rates will be insane. They wouldn't be able to do any new projects.
It's funny though, right? Even with all the signs, the debt piling up, so many people thought Evergrande was too big to fail. Like, surely the Chinese government would swoop in and bail them out at the last minute, stop the whole thing from blowing up and taking the rest of the economy with it. Yeah, that too big to fail idea, it pops up all the time in these financial crises. But with Evergrande, the government, well, they kind of let them hang out there for a while. There were some attempts to, restructure their debt, sell off some stuff, but it wasn't enough.
And so, January 2024, a Hong Kong court orders the liquidation of Evergrande. The giant falls.
Yeah.
And everyone realizes, oh, this isn't just one company messing up. It's like the whole system has cracks.
Yeah, that's the scary part. Evergrande was like a warning sign for the entire Chinese property market. All the stuff that brought them down, the debt, the risky moves, thinking prices would just keep going up forever, it was happening everywhere.
Like with Country Garden, right? Another huge developer, and they're on the verge of collapsing too. And the video mentioned all these other developers with billions in unpaid debt. It's a big mess.
For sure. And that raises a big question. What does this mean for regular people in China, especially the middle class? They put so much of their money into real estate.
Yeah, they thought it was a safe investment, a way to build wealth. Now it's like, what happens to all those families who put their savings into apartments that might never even get built?
It's heartbreaking. It's like a betrayal, right? They were depending on those investments for their future, and now everything's uncertain. It really exposes the human cost of this whole crisis.
It makes you think about that unspoken agreement in China, right? People accepted less freedom in exchange for a better life, a stronger economy. But if the government can't deliver on that promise, then what?
Right, exactly. What happens to that social contract? Do people keep holding up their end of the bargain? And it goes beyond China too, right? Their economy is so tied to the rest of the world. Any problems they have, we all feel it.
It's like a domino effect. This housing crisis is a reminder that we're all connected, whether we realize it or not. It's kind of wild, right? This whole housing boom, everyone thought it was this huge success story, but really it was built on like a foundation of sand, or I guess a mountain of debt they hoped no one would notice.
Yeah, like a house of cards waiting to topple. And, we saw what happened. The government's decision to basically let Evergrande go down. It was a calculated risk, for sure, trying to contain the damage. But the fallout is still happening.
So what now?
Yeah.
What happens to China's housing market? And what about the country as a whole? Feels like things are really up in the air.
Big question, isn't it? How they deal with this is going to shape their whole economic future and their social landscape too. Can they get things back on track, make people believe in the system again? Or is this the start of something bigger? Maybe a reckoning with how they've been doing things, this whole growth at all costs thing.
There was this one part in the video essay that really stuck with me.
Uh-huh.
It said that China needs to shift away from an economy based on real estate speculation,
Yeah.
and move towards something driven by consumption and innovation. But I was like, what does that even mean? How do you actually do that?
It's a huge change, for sure. For so long, people in China saw real estate as the safest investment. If you want them to change that mindset, you've got to give them other options, safe ones, ones they can access. And that means changing a lot of stuff, how the financial system works, even social safety nets.
Makes you think about the human side of all this, too. We've been talking about economics, politics, but there are millions of people whose lives are directly affected by this whole thing. What happens to those families who put everything they had into an apartment that might never get built? The construction workers who are now out of a job.
It's true. You can't forget about the people. Behind all the numbers, the headlines, it's real people's lives that are getting turned upside down. Those stories are just as important as the big picture stuff.
This whole deep dive has been really eye-opening. We started with those tiny apartments back in the 80s, and now we're here talking about these huge companies collapsing, the whole system teetering. It's crazy how connected everything is, Economics, politics, social contracts, even global markets. It's all linked.
Yeah, a wild ride for sure. I think the main takeaway for me is that even in a system that seems super controlled, things happen, stuff you don't expect. And those unexpected things can change everything, literally reshape a whole country's future.
It's a reminder that history is still being written, and we got to pay attention. We got to understand what's happening around us. This deep dive has given us a lot to think about, both for China and for the rest of the world.
Hopefully it makes you want to learn more. Keep digging. Think about the different ways this could all play out for China in the years to come.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into China's housing crisis. We hope you found it interesting and maybe even a little bit thought-provoking.